It's a difficult balancing act, helping offenders reintegrate whilst keeping the public safe. It's the role of the probation service to maintain that balance. But controversial plans to privatise parts of the service in England and Wales will threaten that, say critics. The first major area of probation work to be handed to the private sector has been in London, where we've discovered serious failings.
In October last year, Serco took over the programme for running community service across London in partnership with the London Probation Trust. Newsnight have spoken to people both inside Serco and at the London Probation Trust, and we've seen documentary evidence that raises concerns for the safety of the public, the welfare of offenders and the delivery of justice.
The £35 million contract Serco won means they now have responsibility for community service projects on the ground. The Probation Trust, which also tendered for the contract, still has responsibility for offenders, assessing risk, monitoring progress and imposing sanctions if offenders fail to comply with their sentence. But day-to-day supervision of offenders rests with Serco. It's this breaking up of the service that is causing concern.
The government ran a competition for the delivery of community payback in London, and it submitted bids from various organisations, and ultimately Serco won with a subcontract with London Probation Trust. And the main problem was that it was price competitive, which means that whoever bid, and whatever the quality of the bids, the cheapest would always win. Serco and London Probation, we think, came in the cheapest, and now the cracks are really starting to show.
I seem to be using my time.
There are not currently any spaces available. No one had informed him.
Did not have any future attendance.
Newsnight has seen a series of emails from the London Probation Trust's issue log that lists the problems probation officers have encountered. Offenders turning up to projects to find no supervisor, difficulties getting through to Serco's control centre, and attendance records wrong and incomplete. Whistleblowers at Serco and the London Probation Trust blame 40% staff cuts for pressures on the service.
In our opinion, there are not enough projects and there are not enough staff, and the projects we have are oversubscribed, and anything oversubscribed causes problems.
This was the government's blueprint for the future running of the probation service. They say the way community service was run before Serco took over didn't always command public confidence.
I'll pay for success. I'm very happy that the organisations working with me do well financially, but only if they deliver results.
The importance of keeping accurate records of attendance is crucial to the smooth running of the probation service. If an offender doesn't comply or fails to attend a community service order, their probation officer only has a short window to get them back in front of a judge. Without accurate records of attendance, probation officers can't help the court enforce justice.
In August, the database where offender records were stored and updated, called Delius, switched to a national database called NDelius. During the changeover, records couldn't be updated for a week. Instead, paper records were kept, creating a backlog. We understand Serco promised to have this dealt with by the end of August, but it wasn't.
There was a backlog prior to that anyway. Obviously it did get worse, and we did have a week with no computer systems. We in probation have been expected to catch up with the missed work in that week. Serco just do not have the staff to do it.
We've received documents showing that between the 1st of September and the 6th of October, 1,362 records were not updated by Serco. The Ministry of Justice estimates that there are around 960 people starting community payback each month, so it's not a drop in the ocean.
There was a change in IT systems, and because the bid that they put into the Ministry of Justice was so lean, it doesn't provide for any contingencies at all. So if there's a change of IT or you need extra resources, they couldn't cope with it.
This internal email shows that Serco was so overwhelmed with the backlog of records, they asked London Probation Trust staff to assist with overtime. But by the end of October, 362 records were still out of date. And if records aren't updated, it's difficult for probation officers to sanction offenders through so-called breach proceedings.
With the breaches, if people fail to attend, they get two chances. The first time they get a warning letter. The second time they get a breach letter. We have to get that into court, into the prosecutors, within 8 days. That's the target. We're not getting the information on a lot of cases until possibly 4 or 5 days after they've missed. There are a lot of cases where there is no point even sending them back to court because it's not going to go through the court procedures.
This document shows since Serco took over the contract, there have been consistent complaints of inaccurate and late reporting, peaking in October this year. And we've seen evidence showing that right up until last week, information collected by Serco used to send offenders back to court was incorrect. In a small number of cases we're aware of, offenders have been credited for doing work they haven't actually done, or have been sent back to court for failing to do community service, only for it to be withdrawn or thrown out of court because the information was wrong.
We're finding it increasingly hard to enforce justice in these cases because the quality of the evidence often isn't there. We have to be sure that if we're taking breach action against an offender, that we've got a robust case. We're now relying on Serco instead of our own information, and that information is often incomplete, or it's late, or it's of dubious quality.
What's more, we've seen emails suggesting that prisoners on curfew who've been electronically tagged may not have been monitored properly in one borough of London, raising questions as to whether probation officers knew where offenders had been. This is not part of the community service contract, but the email suggests that Serco had been sending incidents of curfew breaches to the wrong mailbox at the Probation Trust from early September to early October. The Ministry of Justice say they're investigating. When Serco was awarded the contract last year, the Chief Inspector of Probation, Liz Calderbank, said it would be regrettable if work done with offenders became fragmented as a result of more providers being involved. She warned it could increase the potential for communication problems.
The one we're looking at particularly is information accuracy and timeliness.
So we took our evidence to a former Chief Inspector of Probation, Rod Morgan.
What I've seen amongst your evidence is a pattern of inaccuracy. It's difficult to judge as to whether these are isolated cases or whether they're getting better or worse. But you've shown me sufficient material that it calls in. It raises serious questions. In my judgment, there's a sufficient quantity of evidence here for someone to be taking a very close look at it.
The evidence we've discovered shows that a private company has struggled to keep on top of key information, meaning they've not been monitoring some offenders properly. Those within the service who've spoken out tonight say that the breaking up of the community payback scheme in London has had real consequences for the delivery of justice. This comes as questions are already being asked about the government's wider plans for the privatisation of the probation service.
Well, we contacted Serco and they gave us this response. We reject any suggestion that the service is in disarray or that public staff and offender safety has been compromised in the delivery of this contract. Serco has managed community payback in partnership with London Probation Trust since the 31st of October 2012. Together, we manage around 1,000 new offenders every month, and each one is thoroughly risk assessed before being allocated an appropriate place on one of the many projects we have running across London. We're confident that the innovative changes we've introduced in London are increasing operational efficiencies and ultimately saving the taxpayer money. So far, Community Payback has provided London with over 1 million hours of offender labour, and our performance on key measures, including successful completion and starts within 7 days, is above the national average for probation trusts. We're not complacent, and whilst we're very close to fully meeting all our targets, we recognise that improvements are needed in some areas, such as stand downs and offender attendance. We've been working with both the Ministry of Justice and LPT to address this, and are confident that the steps we're taking will deliver the necessary improvements. In common with probation trusts across the country, Serco faced challenges implementing the new national DELIUS IT system, and we worked hard to quickly resolve these issues. Tonight, the Ministry of Justice released a statement. Public safety has not been compromised in the delivery of this contract, which has provided 1 million hours of offender labour for London. Serco's performance has been improving month on month. They're now meeting most key targets and outperforming the national average on most key measures. Latest July figures show 80% of offenders successfully completing their payback, 3% above the national average. And all offenders are thoroughly risk assessed before being placed on a community payback project, and breaches are dealt with robustly. Figures for July show 98% of breach cases were followed through with enforcement action by Serco. They're also offering enough placements to meet the court's demands within London. And it goes on. As with all innovative ways of working, there were some bedding-in issues during the transition stage, and we're dissatisfied these have been resolved. But we're not complacent. We've asked London Probation Trust to inform us of any incidents where they have not received correct paperwork that may have affected breach action. We'll follow up any evidence of this with Serco. Our audit of all contracts the Ministry of Justice holds with both Serco and G4S is ongoing.